Hey everyone, this is Miss Lonnie, and I'm the Humane Education Coordinator for Pasadena Humane, and I am here with our awesome new presenter, Dr. Pyrdek. Hi, Dr. Pyrdek, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. You are actually tuning in to this awesome webinar, guys. This one's Encountering Wildlife Emergencies. So we are going to have a really great discussion with Dr. P about some really important things in our community. But before we get started, we needed to do a few webinar reminders. So let me go ahead and get you guys going. So these are a few reminders while you guys are watching us today. All attendees are automatically muted, so we won't be able to hear you guys. So please just remember that. You can see us, but we can't see you. Please save your questions for the end of the webinar. So you guys can actually send me messages and I will go ahead and wait. And then we can ask Dr. P at the end of her whole webinar. When you're asking questions, please use the chat box. So here's an example on the left. Please don't raise your hand because like we said, we're not going to be able to hear you. And when you use the drop-down box, you go to the questions box to ask the question in the chat. Your questions will only be seen by the organizer, which is me, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible and as time permits. Also, remember that you can watch this webinar recording later on too. So I know we're going to have questions of people asking when they're going to actually get this. You will be receiving this link tomorrow. And another reminder, because we have so many awesome things going on, we have our upcoming free webinar, Photographing Shelter Dogs, from July 22nd from 12 to 1 p.m. You can check that out at pasadenahumane.org workshops. And take it away, Dr. P. I'm so excited to have you on, and a lot of really awesome information you're going to share with us right now. So go right ahead.
Great. Give me 1 second to
No worries.
Started here.
I know a lot of people are really interested in hearing what you have to say because I know we're all experiencing a lot of wildlife, especially sort of because of the things that are going on right now. A lot of people are not outside as much. So a lot of our coyotes and awesome animals are actually coming out to play.
Yeah, and I love talking about what we do here. So this is always a great opportunity. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, it looks great. Take it away.
Perfect. So thanks for that nice introduction, Lonnie. As she said, I'm Dr. P. I'm one of the veterinarians here at Pasadena Humane, and I work in the wildlife department. And so I want to start off, we're going to get to the wildlife emergencies, but I know a lot of people are very familiar with taking their pet, their cat or their dog to the veterinarian and how the veterinarian will work with their animal. And so working with wildlife is very different than working with your pet animal. So I just want to start by explaining a little bit about what we do that's different in wildlife. And so our purpose here in wildlife rehabilitation is to provide professional care to sick, injured, and orphaned wild animals so that ultimately they can be returned to their natural habitat and then live out their natural lives. And this helps us to kind of mitigate some of the detrimental human impacts on wildlife. And I also, just as an aside here, our goal is not to preserve life at all costs, but rather to return animals to living their natural life. And nature can be pretty cruel and pretty harsh, and we may not always like what happens in nature, but we do respect those rules, and it's always important to think about what happens in nature when we're deciding on what we're going to do with our wild patients. So wild animals survive by hiding and by running away. And so when we're working with animals, we are the scary predators to all of these animals. They're not comforted by us petting them or talking to them. And any amount of time that they have to spend in close proximity with us, smelling us, hearing us, is very, very stressful to these animals. And this increased stress has long-term effects on these animals. Sometimes they'll start injuring themselves as they try to get away or they try to escape. Long-term stress decreases the immune system, which can have poor healing or slow healing. And in some cases, animals can be so stressed and these effects can be so detrimental that they can even die. And so I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a wild animal and think about what a human might look like when they pick you up. You have big eyes in the front, you have big teeth that might be, baring their teeth at you, big hands that are reaching toward you. So it might look something a little bit like this. So our plan for the next 30 minutes is I really want to share some of the amazing work that our team does. I want to give you a peek into our wildlife department, and I also really want you to start learning how to ask questions to figure out what is a wildlife emergency, and then what should the finder, or in some cases, what should the health team member do when you find an animal. And so what we're going to do here, I want you to think of these questions. We have two sets of questions that we're going to go through. Our first set of questions we ask before an animal comes into our wildlife department. So we're going to ask, is this animal injured or sick? Is this animal orphaned? Will this animal benefit from being handled? And then, can this be done safely for the animal and the human? And so these might seem pretty straightforward, but these questions are not easy to answer. Our staff answers hundreds of these questions every week regarding people who have found wildlife, and a lot of them, over, I'd say 70%, probably result in the decision that the animal doesn't actually need help. Our second set of questions are going to be questions that we ask after the animal has been rescued and has been brought in. So again, now that we can see that animal, is that animal injured or sick? Can that injury or illness be treated so that that animal can return to the wild? And then 3, does the stress of that treatment justify the probability of a successful return to the wild? And so you can think about this, because you could certainly shove an animal into a cardboard box and keep them alive for several months, but I don't think anybody listening to this webinar would agree that that's in the best interest of that animal. So we really need to balance whether the treatment actually justifies the stress of that treatment, and then will that animal have a realistic chance of being released back out into the wild. So let's go ahead and get started. Ring, ring. We have our wildlife phone, which is always going off. And our first call is, I have a coyote. So here are the details about our first case. We've just gotten a call about a coyote who's missing hair and seems to be hanging out near a house. And so a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so in this case, we actually have a video. So let's take a moment and watch the first 2 videos that this finder has.
In 1,000 feet, turn left onto South Sierra Bonita Avenue.
All right, so here we see a coyote wandering down the street and then moving down the sidewalk. And let's watch our second video. All right, so remember our questions. We're going to start asking ourselves some of these questions. Is this animal injured or sick? And I think everyone can look at that coyote and say, there's a lot of fur missing. There's definitely something going on. All right. Is this animal orphaned? No, but this is an adult coyote. And so we do need to consider that there may be young coyote pups that are out there that may actually be being cared for by this adult, even if this adult is sick or compromised. And then, will this animal benefit from being handled, and can it be done safely for the animal and the human? So let's talk about this a little bit. So there are very few times when you can diagnose an animal based solely on one photo or one quick video. But I'm pretty confident that what we're seeing here is what we call mange or sarcoptic mange, also sometimes called scabies. So these are burrowing mites that burrow through the skin of almost any mammal that has fur and skin. As these mites burrow through the skin, they cause hair loss, they cause itching, and then they cause secondary infection, especially as the animal is scratching to get away or to get at those mites. So as the mites continue to burrow, the animal starts losing their fur, which makes it difficult for them to regulate their temperature. It's difficult for them to stay warm when it gets cold, and it can also be difficult to stay cool when it gets really hot. So this is spread via prolonged direct contact. So wild animals who have mange are not very likely to spread it with pets or coyotes, since they're not really snuggling up next to us or snuggling up next to our pets. But any other animals that may be in close contact with an animal with mange could potentially get it. And so then there's higher mortality from this disease in areas that have harsher weather. So especially further north than us in the Midwest, and even over on the East Coast where they have more rain than we have in Southern California. So specifically with coyotes and mange, coyotes, just a little bit of their natural history. Most coyotes live to be, most coyotes will live to be about 3 years old. Some will live a little longer, and only about 60% survive their first year. And so they survive this really low survival rate by having really frequent large litters. And only the coyotes who are able to adapt very quickly to their changing surroundings are the coyotes who survive and continue on to reproduce. So in urban areas, coyotes serve as a host for sarcoptic mange, and this is considered a natural disease in coyotes. In Southern California, this is maintained at a low level in our local population. And this is the most common, one of the most common natural causes of death in coyotes. Malnutrition and mange are both occupy those top two spots, and that's because coyotes who are living in urban areas have poor diets. They have access to trash, and they're eating a lot of rodents that may potentially be poison from us leaving out rodenticide to kill the rats and mice that are nearby. So these toxins can build up. And so these long-term bad diets and long-term low-level toxicity leads to overall slow compromise, and sometimes they can't fight off these diseases quite as well. However, by far the most common cause of death for coyotes is vehicles, so hit by car, and then shooting, whether legal hunting or illegal shooting and illegal trapping. So when coyotes are affected by mange, it doesn't change their behavior to make them more aggressive, but you will sometimes see increased activity during the day, mainly because they're out when it's warmer and they're seeking food and shelter near houses because they're looking for easy meals. They're looking for where there's trash. They're looking for where they can find areas that are really close to those food sources. And so coyotes with mange can recover, but it really does depend on their underlying health status, their nutritional status, and everything else that's going on with them. So let's go back to our last two questions. Will this animal benefit from being caught, and can it be done safely? And so let's think about this. Mange is the #1 natural cause of death in Southern California. And so remember our mission of wildlife rehab, which is to mitigate the human impact and allow animals the opportunity to live their natural life. And so our goal is not to preserve life above all else. And so if an animal is ill from a natural cause, then wildlife rehabilitation is generally going to recommend not interfering with those natural cycles. So let's go on to the next point. Significant risk to humans who may be attempting to capture this coyote. This is a top predator in our area. He's not going to allow you to put a leash on him and lead him gently to treatment, and there's no way for us to explain we're trying to help him. He's going to be fighting tooth and nail at any attempt to capture and bring him in for help. This coyote is pretty significantly affected with mange, so there's very likely secondary, pretty serious health issues that are going on that are really compromising his immune system. He's probably been eating a pretty poor diet for a while, probably has some sort of level of toxicity. And so there are lots of things that are making this much more difficult to treat than just a straightforward treatment of mange. There's always a significant risk if we try to dart a coyote. Darts do not deliver set amounts of drug consistently, so very risky for this coyote. And then even if we are able to capture and bring him in, there's going to be a long, stressful captivity for probably about half of his life expectancy at this point. And there are very few facilities that exist in order to provide appropriate long-term adult coyote care. So there's a slight possibility that this coyote might recover on his own, but really going back into our goal is to allow these animals to live their natural life to the best of their ability. So our decision on this case is to leave this coyote alone. And this is a really tough choice. And I'm just going to start out by saying even for our wildlife department, we hate making these choices, but these are views into the natural world, and they're not really in line with our human desire to preserve life at all costs. But in our opinion, one of the best things that we can do for this coyote is give him the opportunity to live out his natural life to the best of his ability. So, all right, we're going to move on to our next case. I promise our next cases are not as sad as our first one. So this time we're being interrupted by one of our wildlife assistants who says, "Hey, Dr. P, an animal control officer brought in some birds overnight." So let's talk about our history. We have some baby mockingbirds who are waiting for an exam. These animals were found yesterday by a Good Samaritan. They were found in the yard, under a bush, chirping, trying to fly, but they really couldn't get more than a couple feet off of the ground. The finder looked around for the parents, but didn't really see any in the yard. He was very concerned because there are cats in the neighborhood and parents aren't around, so these babies are orphaned. So an animal control officer picked up the birds and brought them in overnight. So remember our questions? This time, these guys just showed up, so we didn't get the chance to ask our pre-rescue questions. So we're going to ask our questions after they've been admitted. Is this animal injured, sick, or orphaned? Can the injury or illness be treated so that this animal can return to the wild? And does the stress of treatment justify the probability of a successful return to the wild? Let's take a look. All right. So did you guys see what I saw? These don't really look like baby birds. These look more like teenagers. So let's take a quick time out from these baby birds and let's do an overall review of the baby songbird life cycle. Lonnie, you can time me on this one.
All right.
So birds build nests. Some build really elaborate nests. Others lay a few sticks and call it a day. Then birds lay eggs and sit on them until they hatch. Everyone with me so far?
Yep.
So after these baby birds hatch, then they're called hatchlings. They're either naked or they have a little bit of fuzzy hatch down. Oh, I'm going back. I went too fast. So they're not really at this point more than a mouth and a stomach. These mouths are specially designed to get their parents' attention, and they have pronounced gape phalanges or lips along the edge of their beaks. So side note, fun fact, you can identify most species of baby birds based on what the inside and those gape phalanges on the outside look like. Every species has a very specific look. All right, so now we're going on to nestlings. As these babies grow and develop, they're starting to look a little bit more like birds. They have pin feathers. Those look like little quills that are starting to grow, but they're still too little to walk. They're too little to fly, and they can't really do much for themselves. So their gape phalanges, or those lips, are even more pronounced because they want to get their parents' attention so that they can eat. And these guys eat all the time. So after a while, our babies keep growing and they have feathers that actually look like feathers. They can walk and they're starting to look like birds. So they start exploring the nest and they're really a little too big. The bold ones jump out the shyer ones pushed or fall out. And this process is called fledgling. And so now the babies are called fledglings. They look like dull colored adults. They have short stubby tails, short stubby wings, some extra camouflage to help them blend in. They have slightly less pronounced gape phalanges on their beaks because it's time for them to start finding food on their own. These guys hop around on the ground for a few days because they're still too little to fly. Their parents will hover around and they'll drive off predators, show them food, help them find shelter and water. So let's go back to our patients. What do you guys see when you're looking at them? I see a short stubby tail. I see some short stubby wings. I see some pronounced gape phalanges or lips right along the edge of their beak. And then I also see some spots that are on their chest, providing some extra camouflage to help them blend into the bushes. So these guys are here in front of us. So we're going to do a physical exam on them and make sure that they look pretty good. So our patients here are bright, alert, and reactive. They're about 5% dehydrated, which is pretty mild dehydration. They're hopping around, they're chirping like we saw in the video, and they're occasionally gaping, so opening up their mouth to show off that bright color inside to get parents' attention for food. These guys are pretty scared of humans, and we don't really see a whole lot of physical abnormalities or injuries on them. So remember our questions? Is this animal sick or injured? What do you think? I don't think these guys are sick or injured. Can this injury be treated in a way that allows them to return to the wild? Well, they're not injured, so we don't really have an injury to treat. And then does the stress of treatment justify the probability of return to function in the wild? So these guys, let's talk about that. They're really still too young to be on their own, and they really need their parents to help guide them and show them how to be real birds. And so we can raise birds, but we're never going to be as good as their real parents. So in this case, we actually had an exact address of where these birds were found, and they'd been in our care for less than 12 hours. So there's still a really good chance that mom and pops are out there looking for them. So at this point, it became an emergency situation in order to get them back home as soon as possible before the parents stop looking for them. So we sent an officer out to return them, and this really is one of my favorite stories here. As soon as the officer stepped out of the car and the baby started chirping, the officer was dive bombed by two very angry, very concerned parents. The officer left the box with the babies under a shrub and then took cover in his truck. And I really wish that I had a video in order to share this. I don't, but this is a case that we see over and over again. And so I have a case of a crow who is same thing, a fledgling. And so I'm going to show you this video, and you can see the parents are up on the telephone wire calling, and you can see the baby down below. Let's watch.
Oh, these are the parents. There's one over there too. Yep, gonna be all right. See you later, bud.
All right, and then let's watch this baby on the ground a little more. One more little video.
I think that's your mom looking for you. I think your mama found you, bud. Good luck.
And so this is very normal fledgling behavior. So how do we avoid bird napping? What are you going to do next time you see birds on the ground? So remember our baby songbird life cycle? Can you identify how old the babies are? And then do they belong in the nest, or do they belong on the ground? If they belong on the ground and they look pretty big and alert and well aware of everything, watch for the parents from a distance. Those parents are never going to be able to come down and drive you off because you're just too big. But if you leave and you watch from a window or you watch from the other side of the yard, you might see those parents come down and take care of those babies. If it's in the evening and the sun's gone down and you see a bird huddled under a bush, it's very possible that those parents are still up in the trees keeping an eye, but they're not going to come down while it's dark. So leave the bird overnight, put him into the bush, help him take cover, and then recheck him in the morning to see how he's doing. Our website has great tips for how to help reunite baby birds with their parents, and then also tips for what to do when you see birds who are obviously injured. If they're laying on their side, they're not getting up, those birds absolutely need to come in right away. All right, ring, ring. Our phone keeps ringing. And so now we have someone who has found a baby squirrel. So here's what we got. A member of the public has found a baby squirrel in her front yard. The squirrel's eyes are just barely open, and the squirrel feels kind of warm. It's crawling around aimlessly on the ground. So the finders picked up the squirrel and currently has it inside the kitchen. Her kids are watching it to make sure that squirrel is okay. All right, remember our questions? Is this animal injured or sick? Say maybe. Is the animal orphaned? For real? Because remember those birds, we didn't see the parents around right away, but that bird wasn't actually orphaned. In this case, let's say maybe, we don't know yet. And will this animal benefit from being brought in? And can it be done safely for the animals and the humans? So I think we need some more information. So again, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here's a picture of our baby squirrel. And so you can see, well, his eyes are closed because he's too young for those eyes to be open. And he's sort of huddled up against the side of the finder's hands. So let's talk about the life of a baby squirrel and maybe how this baby squirrel ended up to be in this finder's hands. So mom squirrels will build nests or drays, which are carefully organized clumps of sticks, leaves, and other collected material. Squirrels are born in the spring or the early summer, and their mothers are very attentive. Babies will stay in the nest until they're about 6 weeks old. As they grow, they start becoming more active and they may wander out of the nest. Sometimes they fall. Nests can be destroyed during a storm or during tree trimming, which is why we recommend tree trimming only in the winter. So if a baby is sick, sometimes a mother will actually push it out of the nest, sensing that it's not going to survive and not wanting to jeopardize the rest of the squirrels in the litter. All right, so remember our questions. Is this animal injured or sick? So not obvious, nothing obvious on that photo. Is this animal orphaned? For real? And it might be, we still don't know. And then will this animal benefit from being brought in, and can it be done safely? So again, just like the birds, it's way better for this baby squirrel to be with its mom. And remember right now, this baby squirrel is actually still in the kitchen with all of the kids who are watching it. Remember that monster analogy? This is a terrifying situation, even for some adults, but even more so for a baby squirrel. If we admit this squirrel, we're not going to do as good a job as his mother. So we want to do everything we can to get him reunited. So right now, we need the finder to give some emergency care to this baby. The baby is kind of warm, so we want to make sure that this baby gets warmed up in order to help him be able to survive while we're looking to replace him with his mother. So we want to first reduce the stress. We have the finder place the baby in a warm, dark, dry, quiet space and handle this baby as little as possible. We want her to warm the baby by putting a warm rice sock or a wrapped hot water bottle next to it. And then once that baby feels nice and toasty to the touch, we have her take that whole box with a little hole and set that box at the base of the tree where that baby was found. This way, the mother may be able to go back and forth from her nest, but she's probably looking for that baby. And then we're going to leave it alone. You may notice one thing we didn't ask the finder to do is feed this baby. And this is on purpose. We don't want anyone to feed him because a crying baby is going to make it much easier for mom to find him. If he's warm and has a full belly and he's just sleeping in that box, mom is not going to find him. So after he's in the box, we want to check on him for several hours. Check on him several hours later. The mother may come back to the nest and care for it in the box for a while, or she may actually take that baby and move it back into the nest. And so, yes, there are other outcomes as well, including the mother maybe not finding the baby, or a predator could potentially come and take the baby And again, this is still a natural outcome for the baby, but we are really hoping that we're going to be able to get this baby reunited with his mom so we can have a positive outcome. And then the other question we get, like, what about the scent? Is the mother going to reject him because it smells like human now? And say, yes, your scent is going to be on this baby, but remember, mother squirrels are very attentive mothers. If your child got lost and was found by a heavily perfumed stranger in a department store, would you refuse to take your child back just because he smelled like Axe body spray now? So here's our baby squirrel, and you can see we have a box, a little hole cut out of the side, and it's at the base of the tree where that squirrel was found. But it's 12 hours later, and the mother has still not come back. The baby feels cold again, and the baby's crying now. So remember our questions. Is this animal injured or sick? If he's cold, he's hypothermic. And so yes, this animal is sick or injured. Is this animal orphaned? I think we can say pretty confidently now this is a yes. We haven't been able to reunite him with his mom, so now he's an orphan. And so it's time to bring this animal in for care. So we again have the finder place this warmer next to the baby to have him warmed up, and then the baby is brought in for care. All right, so now the squirrel is in front of us, and so we have some questions that we're going to ask after admit. Is this animal injured or sick? Can the injury or illness be treated? And then does the stress of the treatment justify him actually returning to the wild? So here are some pictures of our baby squirrel. You can see him over here on the right. And so he has a decreased temperature, he's dehydrated, he actually has a lot of live fleas and flea bites on him, and he has a little bit of a bloody nose. And so after his exam, we're diagnosing him with hypothermia. So he's got mild hypothermia. We're diagnosing him with epistaxis, or bloody nose, which can be secondary to trauma, but always important to think there could be other things, including parasites, dental disease, different toxicities, or cancer, but they're probably unlikely. And then we're also diagnosing him as an orphan baby. So now it's time for us to provide some emergency care for this baby squirrel. So first, we want to stabilize him. We want to inject some warm fluids under the skin to help get him rehydrated. So you can see we're doing that in the top right, and I know that's not a squirrel, but we treat all kinds of baby animals with subcutaneous fluids like that. We're going to house him in an incubator until he's able to maintain his own body temperature. And then because he's a little sick, we're going to start him on some anti-inflammatories and some antibiotics. And then we're also going to treat him with some anti-parasitic medication in order to take care of all of those fleas. And then once the squirrel is stabilized, we're going to begin oral hydration and then wean him onto a special squirrel formula in order to provide all of the nutrients he needs to continue growing. As he gets healthier and grows a little larger, we're going to introduce him into a group so he has the comfort of being with other fake adopted siblings, and then also starts learning communication and how to interact properly with other squirrels. And in general, we raise squirrels until they're about 12 weeks old, all the while preparing him how to survive. And as good as we are, we're still not good as mom. I mean, a baby squirrel's best option for survival is always going to be to stay with his wild family, which is really why we try so hard to reunite them. And if we can't reunite them, then that's when we'll take them in. So some cute pictures of our baby squirrels. We have babies taking their bottles, and then they start moving outside as soon as we can, where they have lots of opportunity in order to dig, in order to bury nuts, in order to climb trees. And then we actually have our squirrels start forming their own groups in their own little houses, and then they're released in those houses together. And just squirrels that are raised alone, especially those that are raised in a house, are really not suitable to be released. They really don't know how to communicate with other squirrels. They don't know how to find their own food outside, and they really struggle to start even finding shelter. So preparing them for release is all about teaching them how to fend for themselves and giving them the opportunity to do these squirrel things all day long. And then the second part is always to find an appropriate release site for them. And so those houses that they choose, in their own groups that they choose to be in, we take their houses with food and set them up into areas in order to allow them to go out and live their natural wild lives. And so, again, another aside, if you can't get enough of your urban wildlife and you think you have a good yard in which you could release some wildlife, send us an email. We're always looking for great spots in order to release new, healthy, rehabilitated animals. All right, ring, ring. Here goes our phone again. Now I have an injured falcon. All right, here are our details. So a man was in his backyard when he noticed a falcon in the yard with a drooping wing. When he approached the bird, it fluffed its feathers, but it did not attempt to move away. And then sometimes when he approached it, it rolled onto his back and held his talons out toward the man. So we love our pictures. And so let's take a look at how old this bird is. This one looks like an adult. He's got a long tail and long wingtips. And so an adult bird's first attempt is going to be to fly away. Now, sometimes these birds that hunt might stay if they've just caught a meal because that meal is too heavy for them to fly off with. If they can't fly, and if you look here on this picture on the left, this falcon doesn't have any meal, so he's staying there because he's not able to fly away. If he can't fly, then a bird of prey will fluff out their feathers in order to appear larger, and they'll roll onto their back, holding their sharp talons between them and whatever the threat is. And so if you look at this picture on the right, when he's tucking his wings up against his body, it doesn't look like he's tucking that right wing in. That's a pretty serious droop. So it looks like there's something going on. So remember our questions. Is this animal injured or sick? I'd say, yeah, he can't, there's something going on with that wing. Is the animal orphaned? For real? Well, no, this is an adult, so he's not orphaned. And even though there might be babies in a nest somewhere, right now, if he can't fly, he's not able to provide for those babies. So those babies in the nest are orphaned, and we're going to hope that his mate is able to care for them. Will this animal benefit from being handled? I think so. This animal needs care. And then can this be done safely for the animal and for the humans? And so it can, but we need to be careful. So in this case, we have the finder throw a towel over the bird in order to neutralize all of his pointy bits and keep him from thrashing and flapping that wing to injure it further. So the entire towel is then wrapped up around the bird. He's put in a cardboard box and then left in a quiet, warm space until an animal control officer is able to pick him up and transport him to see us. So now the falcon is here and he's arrived. Now he's really stressed because he just had a car ride, he can't fly, all kinds of things have been happening. And so we let him sit for 20 or 30 minutes in order to relax before we even do anything for him. Because if we look at him when he's too stressed, he may actually die during our exam. So we really want him to relax so that we can get a good look and actually help him. And so this is what we find on our exam. This bird is moderately dehydrated. He has a lot of swelling and bruising halfway down his wing, so the radius and the ulna for my anatomy people out there. He has a firm nodular or round swelling at the caudal aspect of his right ulna. So on the back of his wing, he's got some lump. We don't feel any crepitus, so it doesn't feel like those bones are broken and rubbing up against each other in an abnormal way. He's a little bit skinny, but he's generally very bright, alert, responsive, and like we said, he's really stressed. So we're diagnosing this guy with a wing injury. So we know he's injured. So let's go back to our questions. Is he sick or injured? That answer is yes. Can this injury be treated in a way that allows him to return to the wild? Maybe. And does the stress of treatment justify the probability? And so I think we need some more information. So here's what we're going to do to get some more information. We're going to run a little tiny bit of blood work on this hawk. And so we take a small blood sample and we see that his hematocrit, which is a count of his red blood cell, is about 40. So he's not anemic, meaning that he hasn't lost a large amount of blood. We're also checking his total protein level. His total protein is 5, which is normal for him. So not significant or not indicating a really significant underlying disease. So we're able to give him some fluids. And then once he's stable, we're able to anesthetize him in order to take some radiographs. So here's a photo of his radiograph, and you see that arrow pointing to that round item in his wing. He has a bullet that's actually lodged into his ulna. And so the bone is fractured, and difficult to see here, but the bone is fractured right around that bullet, but doesn't appear to be very displaced, meaning that all of the bone fragments are still pretty well aligned and pretty close to where they belong. So he's already under anesthesia for our x-rays that we took. It's time for surgery. And so a quick warning, the next video is just a short clip of part of his surgery of this falcon's wing. If you're a little squeamish and you don't want to see this video, minimize your viewing screen now. The video is about 16 seconds, and we'll give you a heads up when we're past that video. And so the surgery video here is us getting started, or is us just removing the bullet from his wing. All right, and so there's our bullet. And we need to make sure that we carefully remove this so that the wing isn't damaged any further. But also important to remove that bullet so that lead doesn't continue to leach into the bloodstream and continue to poison the patient. And then we need to make sure we very carefully close the skin so that these feathers will grow back appropriately and he's still able to fly. All right, and for those who have minimized the screen, we're back up. And so here he is, recovered from his anesthesia and his surgery, and he's actually waiting for transport because not every wildlife rehabilitation center can provide everything for every animal. And so in his case, we don't have a flight cage that's big enough in order to provide him with the space that he needs in order to rebuild his flight muscles, practice hunting, and get used to this new wing and any scar tissue he might have. So we're able to stabilize him and then transfer him to a different center that actually has the ability to give him what he needs. And so in this case, now he's rehabilitated, and we actually have a release video of him flying around in the sky. And you can see he's making some big circles, getting the lay of the land. And then flies off into the distance, which is always our goal and always the outcome that we really love to see. So really want to thank everyone for sticking with us through the webinar. Really hope that you've enjoyed learning about our cases and whether they're sad cases or whether they're happy cases. And I also really hope that the next time you or a neighbor or a friend finds a wild animal outside, that you're going to be able to ask yourself some of those same questions and think about whether it's really an emergency. Is that bird really a baby bird? And then what do you need to do about it? And then again, if you're interested in being a release site for any of our rehabilitated animals, or you just have more general questions, shoot us an email at wildlife@pasadenahumane.org. And again, our website we referred to has tons of information about what to do if you found injured wildlife, or wildlife you're not even sure if it's injured, and what you can do. And then Pasadena is always, always, always very dependent on our volunteers. So send our volunteer coordinator an email if you're interested in volunteering with us. And Pasadena Humane as a shelter really relies on our community to support the work that we do. And so please visit our site for any other ways that you may be able to help and support the care that we give, not only to our wild patients, but all the other dogs and cats and rabbits that are out in our community. And so with that, Lonnie, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I think we're going to go ahead and try to take some questions.
Yeah, awesome. Dr. P, that was such a great webinar. I think a lot of people really appreciated it. I saw Cindy Sanchez actually asked a question, and you actually answered it quite quickly within, but it was about how to sort of care and treat the animals, the birds when they see them. like what was the most humane way of handling when you see, you know, birds that are actually out of the nest? So can you add a little bit to that really quickly?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Do you mind just repeating that question real quick
Of
for me?
course. I got a little lag there. It was, what would be the most humane way of handling this as not able to get the partial, hold on. I guess the most humane way to handle birds that are out of nests. So I guess the birds that just fell out of nests. I know you
Okay.
answered it, but I know we have a lot of people on here right now.
Great. So so the first thing whenever you see a bird who's fallen out of the nest is to first identify the age and where that bird belongs. So does that bird belong in the nest or does it belong on the ground? And then does that bird actually need help? So if he's bright and alert and jumping around and he's a fledgling, then there's probably not much you need to do for him. If he's laying on his side, if he's dragging a leg, if you see blood or you see flies, then you need to contact your local rehabilitation center so that they can take that bird in. Now, if it's a younger bird, one of those hatchlings or a nestling who still belongs in the nest, then what you need to do first is start looking up in the trees and think about, where is that nest? If you can find the nest and you can put that bird back in the nest, then that's the best thing. And you can just pick that bird up, gently put him back into that nest, and then just keep an eye on it, make sure the parents are still coming. If it's a case where the nest has been destroyed, and I think I have a great friend in Chicago who had a nest that was just built on a drain pipe. A big storm came through, knocked the nest down. He's actually able to take that nest pieces, put them back into a Tupperware container, and then tie that Tupperware container back onto the drain pipe. And so the parents are still continuing to feed those babies, and they're using now that makeshift nest. If you're not sure exactly where that nest is found, you can take your best guess and again put that baby in a makeshift nest, whether it's a little box lined with some paper towels, whether it's a little Tupperware, a Cool-It container. Put it close to where you think the nest might be, as high as possible. You know, whether you staple gun it to the tree, you tie it on, use a bungee cord, and then again, watch from a distance. A lot of times parents are looking for their babies and they'll come down and they'll look to see if they can just take care of that baby in the new nest. Unlike a squirrel, they're not able to pick their baby up and put it back in their nest, so they'll most likely choose to use that new nest until the babies fledge and leave that nest.
Got it. That's a really great example. Actually, I like that you said to kind of makeshift it in different ways to just try to get it as local to where it originated from. We have another question. Where do we release the squirrels? Are there specific parameters as to how we decide that?
Yeah, so we look for places, our requirements for how we decide where to release squirrels is that there has to be a really good food source that's around. So we consider, we call them mast producing trees, so oak trees, pine trees, trees that produce a lot of seeds that squirrels like to eat. We like to make sure that there's at least one really big tree nearby or several trees within the area. And we also like to make sure that there's not a really high territorial established population of squirrels, because those babies will get kicked out right away and there'll be a big fight. And so we look for an area where there might be, you know, a little opening for squirrels. And we also like to keep them off of main streets or main highways. So at least in backyards or on quieter streets, cul-de-sacs, areas like that. And then we put up those squirrel boxes there.
Very cool.
Yeah, and then the other kind of further along with that, we actually have whoever is releasing those squirrels put out food for those squirrels every other day for at least a week, just to give them a little bit of a help while they're adjusting to their new territory and figuring out, you know, how to find their own food. And I have squirrels in my own front yard that were released, and they're still doing great. We see them running around all the time. So
oh, that's so cool. I love
well.
our work. It's amazing. Do we rehab anything other than birds?
Yeah, so we rehab any pretty much any wild animal in California. And we're plugged into a network. So animals that we can't specifically care for to the completion of their rehab, we have great partnerships with local wildlife centers, and we wouldn't be able to do it without our relationships with them in order to transfer some of those animals so that they can get the care and the things that they need. The only animals that we don't specifically care for here, and it's more of a legal issue and a safety issue, we don't admit bears into our wildlife center, and we don't admit mountain lions or venomous snakes, mainly because they're pretty dangerous for our staff to work with as well.
Okay, we have another question. What should you do if you find injured wildlife outside of working hours, if everything seems closed around you?
So and that happens, right? Because everyone finds animals after they're at work, and everything obviously is already closed. And so first is to, confirm that that animal is actually injured and actually needs help. If it is, then what we do is take that animal somewhere where it's quiet and somewhere where it's warm. So cardboard box, it's dark, put that somewhere warm, quiet, and then if you have a heating pad, you can put that box partly on a heating pad, partly off, so that animal can decide whether to go into a warm spot or into a quiet spot. So, and then, contact your local center in the morning. If it's an emergency and the animal is really injured, really, really suffering and needs medical care, and you're very certain of that, a lot of your local veterinary emergency centers that are open 24 hours may be able to take that animal and help to at least give him some initial care and then get him into rehab next morning.
Absolutely. So they can actually contact their local, like what you just said, and they'll be able to answer those questions locally as well. Keep that in mind, you guys, is that everyone has kind of different ways that they handle wildlife in your area. So if you're here for this, and it's important that you maybe make those connections and maybe have a list of numbers for your local information that you can gain.
That's actually a great point. Some wildlife centers will also have after-hour drop-off areas. So when you find that animal, you can actually take it to your local wildlife rehab center, and they'll have an after-hour drop-off area already set up for that animal so that they can take care of it first thing when they get back in the morning.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that. So I'm glad we brought that up. What should people do if they can encounter a deceased or injured opossum? And then they said something about maybe if there were babies around them or in their pouches, how would they handle that?
Yeah, and so my poor husband had to learn this when we first started dating, that when we see possums that are freshly killed along the side of the road, I actually pull over and check them, because a lot of times the mother will be killed, but the babies will still be living. So the babies, and for them it's a death sentence if they're still on their mother. And so if the babies are old enough in order to be rehabilitated, and possum babies, they start out the size of jelly beans, they're tiny. We'll actually take those babies, and you can take those into your local rehab center, and then they can care for them. So same thing, just carefully removing them, keeping them somewhere warm, keeping them somewhere quiet, and then and then taking them in somewhere where they can be cared for until they can be released on their own again.
And also should I call if I see a limping coyote? And maybe it says limping for weeks, so maybe they've been monitoring and seeing a local coyote.
Right. So again, that's kind of going back to those questions about, will that animal benefit from care? And so one of the other barometers that very briefly touched on is that if an animal is not very easy to capture, to bring in, a lot of times that means that animal is actually doing okay out in the wild. Because he's able to run and get away from predators, he's probably still able to run around and get food. And so in the case of a coyote, There aren't really a whole lot of good rehab options for him, especially with, you know, a limp or something like that. So if we were to try and go out and, you know, capture that coyote and bring him in, there's going to be another coyote who moves into his territory right away. He's going to have a really long-term rehab in order to, you know, potentially fix whatever he has. And then when we try to release him back into his territory, now he's an older coyote who's trying to reestablish his territory that he's just been kicked out of. And so in the case of a coyote who's limping, especially if he's been limping for several weeks, it doesn't sound like an injury that that's preventing him from being able to do a lot of his natural behaviors. And so, I mean, we see coyotes out there who limps. There's a coyote, I forget where, who is actually missing the bottom half of its paw, probably from an old trapping incident. And that coyote is out there still running and doing well. And even, you know, sometimes you see deer out there that have been hit by a car and they're completely lame. There's a deer who used to visit another yard that I was in back on the East Coast, who was essentially running around on 3 legs. And that deer was doing really well. So when we're making these decisions, we really try to decide whether, you know, is that animal compensating with its injury, even if it's not 100% perfect outside? But is it compensating and still able to live out, you know, its natural life and do its natural behaviors before making that call whether to bring it in?
Got it. And I think it's really important to say, because I feel like we just keep having the same conversation with people, is just leaving the animals alone and observing them and letting them live their wild lives for the most part, right, Dr. P?
Yeah, and it's also really hard because our inclination as humans is we see something that's injured and we want to help it and we want to care for it. And sometimes that causes us to make assumptions, and, you know, we're really imposing our own human rules on things that are out there. And, you know, like these animals, even though they're in our urban environments, they're still obeying the laws of nature, and that's still what they're following.
Absolutely.
And so we try to respect that, but also help, you know, where we can, especially when some of these injuries may be things that, you know, we've caused by moving into their area.
That's awesome, Dr. P. You're amazing. Thank you so much. You did such an amazing job, and I hope that you guys really enjoyed this webinar as much as I did. If you guys have any more questions, we do have a lot more questions, but we're running out of time. So just a reminder that you can email us at wildlife@pasadenahumane.org. Right, Dr. P?
That's right, and we answer our emails as quickly as we can. So.
Yeah, so we do the best we can, and if you guys have questions, like I said, please reach out. And Dr. P, thank you again. Was there anything else you wanted to say really quickly before we call it?
No, I hope everyone's really enjoyed it and everyone feels a little bit more empowered and knowledgeable to make some of these decisions and start helping the wildlife in their own neighborhood.
Absolutely. Okay, then bye, Dr. P. Thank you. Bye, you guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.